For 4 weeks, we're working through the Old Testament book of Esther, looking at the life and death of Haman. Haman was a Persian official during the 5th century BC, and we're looking at his life because Haman is the poster child for how to lose it all because of dumb mistakes and deadly errors, and we want to learn from the mistakes he made and avoid them in our own lives. So far in the story, King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, promoted Haman to chief of staff. That position came with numerous perks. Among those perks was the fact that the royal officials had to bow down and pay homage to Haman. There was one guy named Mordecai who refused. So we're going to jump into the story. We're in Esther Chapter 3, beginning at verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down or paying homage, he was filled with rage. And when he learned of Mordecai's ethnic identity, it seemed repugnant to Haman to do away with Mordecai alone. He planned to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout Ahasuerus' kingdom. Does that seem like overkill to you? I mean, Haman saw that Mordecai was disrespecting him, and instead of getting Mordecai in trouble, or perhaps even murdering Mordecai over it, or perhaps, maybe another level up would be, for Haman to try to see if Mordecai had family and to make them pay for Mordecai's disrespect. No, Haman thought that the only appropriate course of action was to murder Mordecai and all of Mordecai's fellow Jews. Anything else, anything less than that felt wrong to him. So over the next couple chapters, you learned some more things take place as Haman begins to put his plan into action. First, he bribed the king to get the king's approval for his genocide plan, and then he superstitiously picked a date for extermination of all the Jews. They sent letters to the king's regional governments telling them to round up and kill all the Jews on that said date and to keep the plunder as payment. Well, Mordecai saw the official announcement and sent word to Esther asking her to go to the king to reveal her identity, her nationality actually, and to plead for her people. And after 3 days of prayer and fasting, Esther approached the king. But rather than quickly state her request, she wisely invited the king and Haman to a banquet. And the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared for them. So we jump back into the story. Esther chapter 5, verse 6. Now, while drinking the wine, the king asked Esther, well, whatever you ask for will be given to you. Whatever you want, even half the kingdom, will be done. So Esther answered, this is my petition and my request. If I found favor in the eyes of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and perform my request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet I'll prepare for them. Tomorrow I'll do what the king asked. And so Esther said, hey, King, thank you so much for your generous offer. Here's my request. Would you come back tomorrow, come to another banquet, and I will share with you what's really on my heart at that point in time. Verse 9. That day, Haman left full of joy and in good spirits, but when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and Mordecai didn't rise or tremble in fear at his presence, Haman was filled with rage towards Mordecai. So Haman is outraged again. No surprise there. Verse 10. Yet Haman controlled himself and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh to join him. Then Haman described for them his glorious wealth and his many sons, and he told them how the king had honored him and promoted him in rank over the other officials and the royal staff. And what's more, Haman added, Queen Esther invited no one but me to join the king at the banquet she'd prepared, and I'm invited again tomorrow to join her with the king. Still, none of this satisfies me since I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate all the time. You can clearly see Haman is dominated by the one. He is experiencing the tyranny of the one. He said it himself. He said, I can't enjoy my wife, my family, my friends, my money, the honor the king had, the great time I had at the banquet tonight, the fact that I alone get to go with the king. I can't enjoy any of it as long as this guy, Mordecai, is still alive. I hate him, I hate him, I hate him. He's completely dominated by the tyranny of the one. That's what we talked about in week 1, verse 14. His wife Zeresh and all his friends told him, have them build a gallows 75 feet tall. Ask the king in the morning to hang Mordecai on it. Then go to the banquet with the king and enjoy yourself. The advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows constructed. Now, a couple of notes here. This might have been a gallows, like we think of, where hang the person by a noose. Probably not. It was probably an impaling stake. That was more common in those days. So a big stake, and they would, throw the person onto it, and then it would impale them, and the person would slide down the stake. Pretty gory. But 75 foot tall, that was a ridiculous height. And it was meant so that it would dominate the skyline, so probably no matter where you were in the city, you'd be able to see, if Haman's plan works, you'd be able to see Mordecai impaled on the top of this 75-foot high pole. So, does that catch your attention? I mean, besides the gore, did anything else catch your attention there? Yeah, like the gallows or the impaling stake was 75 foot high. That, it says to me that Haman is illustrating a propensity for overkill. Really? Like a gallows 75 foot high, I mean, that's overkill. How tall does it need to be to kill the guy? About 3 feet. If it was a traditional gallows with a noose, how tall does that need to be? About 1 foot taller than the guy, right? But that's not how Haman seems to be thinking. I ask you if that's overkill, and you probably, are thinking, well, yeah, that's overkill, Pastor. I agree with you. Yeah, 75 foot tall. That's way over the top. But here's the crazy thing. It seemed reasonable to Haman. Why? Maybe culture. There's some evidence there in that culture that, really big and exaggerated was kind of an in thing. But more likely, I don't think it was just the culture. I think Haman resorted to overkill, and it seemed not to be overkill to him because he had exaggerated the offense. He'd blown the offense way out of proportion. If the offense was this high, in Haman's mind, it was this high. And so if you're going to need to kill somebody, and an impaling stick this long would work, then a pole that long was appropriate because the offense had been exaggerated in the mind of Haman. I mean, think about it. What was the actual offense? Well, he didn't bow or pay homage, right? What was the felt offense? How did Haman view it? Well, I think for starters, Haman saw this as the fact that Mordecai had stolen Haman's pride when he didn't tremble or bow in fear. He wasn't all afraid. That was verse 9. You saw Haman's pride. He prided himself in being a man that others were afraid of. And so when Mordecai didn't tremble in fear, that stole Haman's pride. It also stole Haman's satisfaction. You saw that in verses 11 to 13, and we've already talked about that. Here's the point. Haman blamed Mordecai for everything that took place within Haman. Haman didn't just blame Mordecai for what Mordecai did. Haman blamed Mordecai for everything that Haman felt on the inside. Haman blamed Mordecai for everything that's taking place within him. Does that make sense? So here's Haman's error that we want to look at and avoid. Haman's error is he exaggerated the offense against him, and that proved to be a deadly one. You'll find out later on in the story. But there's something else that actually caused Haman to make that deadly error, that dumb mistake. And this is what it is. I think Haman exaggerated his own importance. He overinflated his own importance. And that's the deadly error that you and I want to avoid. We want to avoid the deadly error of exaggerating or overinflating our importance. If we overinflate our own importance, then it's only natural that we'll exaggerate the offenses of others like Haman did. And therefore, it'll be only natural that we'll create a justice system that is way out of whack as well. And here's why. When I overinflate my importance, and then consequently I will overinflate any offenses against me because I'll feel the offense more intensely. Something happens on the inside of me, and the actual offense is much bigger than it normally would be because I'm feeling it so much more intensely. I'm more likely as well to assume malice. When I have an overinflated sense of my own importance, my ego is out of whack and it's too big, I start having a tendency to assume that I know the motives of the other person. Like they're just doing this to hurt me. They're doing this to get back at me. They're doing this because they hate me. I'm more likely to assume malice. I'm more likely to overreact in meting out justice, or at least to truly believe that the offense deserves whatever I judge as fair consequences in the event that I'm not able to enforce those consequences. But at the same time that I'm more likely to overreact, be more guilty of overkill, and read into it far more than is actually there. I will think I'm actually being rational and reasonable and perhaps even merciful. That's scary, isn't it? That I can be so self-deceived, and so can you, simply by starting with overinflating or over-exaggerating my own importance, which then leads to exaggerating the offenses that are done against me. I had a good friend who was probably the most forgiving person I knew. He kept forgiving people for the ways that they had slighted him, and I appreciated that about him. But I remember one time I said to him, "Man, I wish you were less forgiving." And when he heard me say that, being a fellow follower of Jesus Christ, I really had his attention, because that doesn't, sound like what a pastor friend would be saying to somebody. I wish you were less forgiving, right? And so he looked at me and like, what are you saying? And then I explained, I wish you were offended less often and you felt it less intensely. I wish you were offended less often and less severely. And what I was saying to my friend was, look, you forgive, but it's really hard. But the reason you have to keep forgiving all the time is because you keep getting offended all the time. And most of the time, the stuff that you get offended over wasn't intentional. And it wasn't a big deal. And it wasn't, right? You with me? My friend would have been much happier. And he and I would have had a whole lot less drama in our lives to deal with and talk through and work through if he was offended less often or less severely. And I think he would have been if the whole ego thing had been right-sized. So overinflate your own importance, and you're likely to overfeel the offenses against you. But secondly, overinflate your own importance, and you'll look for help to keep it fully inflated. We've got to keep it all puffed up. Did you catch the bragging that Haman did there to help keep his injured pride fully inflated? When Haman was leaving the banquet and he saw Mordecai not bow or tremble or rise or even give Haman a second look, a second thought, that injured Haman's pride. And so he looked for a way to puff it back up, to reinflate it. You remember, he went home, he called his friends together, he got his wife, and then he described for them his glorious wealth and his many sons, it said. Like they had forgotten that he was rich. Like they didn't know that he had 10 sons. Like, oh, really? I thought you only had 3. And he's describing the exploits and bragging about, well, my son got an A on his report card in this, and my other son is an honor student at such and such a school. I don't know what all he was bragging about, but that's what it strikes me. And then he told them how the king had honored him and promoted him. Like they didn't know that already. He's not giving them information for their benefit. What is he doing? He's telling them again, manipulating them to get them to listen so that he can re-inflate that sense of importance which has been beaten down. And then he tells them, of course, about how he got invited to the banquet and he's going back to the banquet again. So here's the deal. If I overinflate my own importance, or if you do that, we'll be likely to look for ways to keep it inflated. And one of the key ways that we might find to do that is to use our friends instead of enjoy them. Instead of being a friend and enjoying time with our friends, we'll use them to prop our own ego up. I'm sure you've seen that take place somewhere in your life to this time. So I've been using the phrase exaggerated importance or overinflated sense of importance. The Bible word for that, though, isn't those phrases. The Bible word is the word pride. Pride. And it's pride that leads us to make dumb mistakes that lead to our downfall. Now, I get it. You might be tempted to say, wow, that Haman is a moron. I won't make those mistakes. I thought about that myself. Just know that when I say things like, I won't make those mistakes, that's a pretty proud statement. And remember what the Bible has to say about that. Proverbs 16:18, pride comes before destruction and an arrogant spirit before a fall. So pride leads us to make dumb mistakes that lead to our downfall. Pride brings God's opposition. 1 Peter 5:5. Peter writes, all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And then thirdly, pride prevents us from being able to handle honor. It's just way too dangerous for us. There's certain things that are too dangerous to have in your hands. If you're a proud person, honor is too dangerous for you. It will ruin you. It will corrupt you. Proverbs 16:18, the fear of the Lord is what wisdom teaches, and humility comes before honor. Proverbs 18:12, before a person's downfall, a person's heart is proud, but humility comes before honor. See, a humble person can handle honor. You've seen this. You've got a humble person and somebody gives them an honor and they're appreciative. They don't let it go to their head. They can handle the honor. But a proud person, when they get honored, they actually start thinking they deserve all that, and they are all that with a bag of chips and bean dip, right? And they can't handle that honor, and it ends up leading them to think things about themselves that aren't true, and things about other people that aren't true, and next thing you know, they're making mistakes and doing dumb things, and they have a downfall. But a humble person can handle the honor. So, therefore, what do we do? You know, I don't want to leave us at a point where we just say, well, don't be like Haman. What can we do instead? Well, we can work at preventing this pride, this overinflated sense of ego and self-importance by cultivating humility. So in our few moments together, I just want to give you a quick list of ideas for cultivating humility. And I've kind of broken them into three categories. So there's some God-focused ideas, there's some others-focused ideas, and some me-focused ideas. I'm not going to comment on them a lot. I'm just going to throw them out there. You guys can join me in thinking about them and praying over it and saying, God, is there one of these I ought to be implementing in my life? And then do some more research on how best to implement that particular idea. So here we go. Just some ideas for how to cultivate humility. God-focused ideas. One, I could study the attributes of God. The attributes, this is just a fancy word for the characteristics of God. And so grab my Bible or grab a good book on the topic and start looking at how impressive God really is. Look at His holiness. Look at His perfection. Look at His goodness. Look at His wisdom. Look at His omnipotence, right? His power. And study those attributes of God. And it just helps kind of right-size yourself as you do that. A second God-focused idea would be this, to go on a God hunt. To walk through your day looking to find God at work. Because as you and I see and we celebrate the power and the proactivity of God, we become amazed at His gracious presence, His care, the fact that He listens to our prayers and answers them, the fact that He does the things that really matter, that only God can do, that we could never do, and that helps cultivate that humility, right-sizing of our ego and our pride. Some others-focused ideas. Celebrate the good things that happen to other people. Romans 12:15 talks about rejoice with those who rejoice. I remember seeing this when I was in Portugal. One person got a new apartment, and it was really, really nice. And someone else who didn't have that nice of an apartment went to the first guy's apartment, and he was so excited for the first guy. And to tell you the truth, even though they were both believers, it just kind of caught me off guard. And I remember saying something to the guy who was celebrating the fact that his colleague had such a nice apartment. And he quoted this verse to me. He said, rejoice with those who rejoice. He's like, I'm so happy for him. Humble guy. Another idea, give the right of way. Adopt the mindset of Jesus, Philippians chapter 2, right? And let go of our rights for the benefit of someone who doesn't deserve it. A third idea is to encourage others. Because in order to do this well, we have to see what's actually going on in that person's life and then take time out of our schedule to do something tangible for that person, whether it's give them something or give them a word that makes sense in their life and their situation. And when I'm focusing on looking at what's going on in someone else's life, that helps get get me out of my own head, and it gets the humility a chance to grow and keeps my pride right-sized. A couple me-focused ideas. First, accept suffering. I'm not saying go out and look for it, but accept suffering. When God allows suffering to come into your life, or when God allows suffering to come into my life, one of the things that I can do to cultivate humility is to not rage against that suffering, not almost be demanding, God, you take this from me, but to say, God, if this is your will, help me to drink from this cup. Help me to walk down this road and to do it well. Boy, that is huge. And that is a path to humility that has been walked by the saints over the last several centuries, and probably cultivated humility like perhaps nothing else. One more, and that is to invite feedback. Yeah, invite feedback. Invite the other people in your life to tell you what it is they see, to tell you what it's like to be on the other side of you. Psalm 141, verse 5. Let the righteous one strike me. It's an act of faithful love. Let him rebuke me. It is oil for my head. Let me not refuse it. He's like, look, you've got something. If you're a righteous person, you've got something to say to me, and you tell me and you rebuke me, though it's hard. That is a gift to me. It's oil for my head. It's something that is good for me and is helpful for me, and so I don't want to refuse it. So when it comes to feedback, I invite it. I need to, if I'm going to be a humble person, I invite it. Give people in my life who know me well and have my best interests at heart permission to speak into my life. And then when they say things, wow, what they say is probably going to hurt. I like how Adam Johnson described this when he was doing a talk on this. He said they came up with a phrase that they use. It's, ouch, that helps. Ouch, that helps. Because often the feedback that we're given really does hurt. It hurts to be made aware of a blind spot in our lives. It hurts to know that we've been hurting other people. It hurts to know that, whatever you fill in the blank. But we don't want to just end there with the pain. We want to say, that helps. That helps me to know that that's what's going on. That helps me to know that that's who I am portraying myself to be. Or that helps me to know that's how I'm coming across. Or that helps me to know that I'm treating you in that way. So, ouch, that helps. So we invite, we acknowledge, right? Ouch, that helps. And then we apply it. Boy, that will help us grow in humility. That's great on the prevention side. What if I'm already angry? What if I'm already, really pulling the tug towards responding in a way that probably, in truth, is overkill? What if I'm already angry and I'm ready to blame someone else, not just for what they did, but for all that is doing inside of me? What do I do there? Well, I want to encourage us to consider the restoration step that we talked about last week. Start with that phrase from Andy Stanley. The problem here is I'm not getting what I want. Instead of, the problem here is you did this to me. And the problem here is you, right? Haman would say, the problem here is Mordecai won't bow. The problem here, right? No, start by saying the problem here is I'm not getting what I want. And then evaluate. In light of the fact that I'm not getting what I want and what's going on, do I need to forgive that person? And then perhaps confront them? Or do I need to ask for forgiveness myself because I've let something that is probably a good thing become an essential thing. I've let it become a demand. I've let it get blown way out of proportion. Let's bring this to a close. Our enemy, the devil, wants to keep us blind to the things that would destroy our lives. Pride is certainly one of those things. It's what he gave into. It's what ruined him. And he would love for us to do the same thing, to walk down the same road that he walked down, fall to the same way that Haman did. And so he would tempt us to think, I would never do what Haman did. I wouldn't cross that line. I mean, yeah, I get angry sometimes, but I would never want to kill somebody, or I would never kill their whole family, or I would never want to take them out in a way that everyone else can see it. Right? That's what Haman was doing. He wanted to take out Mordecai in a way that was visible so everyone else would learn a lesson. And maybe, the enemy, our enemy, wants us to think, I would never do that. I would never cross that line. And, I'm hearing this thing about Haman, but he went too far. I would never cross that line. Can I just say this? In this case, the direction is more important than the line. The line being that thing that you and I would say, like, if I did that, that's like too much. That's way overkill. That's the line. The direction is probably more important than the line. And what I mean by that is, what direction am I walking in my life? Am I walking toward humility? Am I cultivating humility and walking toward becoming the kind of person who can handle honor? The person who has a right-sized view of myself, the person who can be offended without it being this all-consuming thing that absolutely has to be eradicated. Am I walking toward humility, or am I walking toward an overinflated sense of my own importance? And the extreme likelihood of using people, being angry, and eventually being disgraced because of a downfall. The direction is probably more important than the line. Which direction am I walking? Which direction are you walking? Toward humility, or toward an overinflated sense of your importance, your own self-importance?